6 years ago, I got the crazy idea that I wanted to try my hand at growing cut flowers. Never mind the fact that I wasn't gifted with a naturally green thumb. More than anything, I just wanted to experience for myself the kind of beauty that I saw so many gardeners sharing across social media. Now, like so many of you can probably attest to, deciding to grow flowers for my own cutting garden, well, that was the exciting part. But that excitement quickly turned to overwhelm when I realized just how many flower varieties there were to choose from. To me, every flower looked beautiful and worth growing, which meant that the problem wouldn't be finding varieties to include in my garden. No, the problem would be narrowing down my list to what could actually fit within my gardening space. Over the years, we have trialed a lot of different flower varieties here at Two Sisters Flower Farm. In fact, if you compare what we grow today to what we originally planted in that first cutting garden, a lot has changed. And that's because through trial and error, we have learned what works for us and what doesn't. Now, the good news is that when you focus in on just the past 3 seasons alone, for our flower farm, not much has changed in regards to our garden plan. Once we finally locked in on the right flower varieties, we no longer had to start our garden planning from scratch each and every year. We simply made minor tweaks and adjustments so that we could improve upon what was already working. If you're new to flower growing or feeling overwhelmed by the process of deciding which flower varieties to include in your cutting garden, I want to help you better understand the strategy behind why we plant the flowers that we do. You see, crop plans for flower farmers differ a lot based on who you talk to. And if you look to the internet, you'll likely notice that for every person that says zinnias are the way to go, there's another saying that they're a waste of time. This is because as growers, we all have unique strengths in what we're able to grow. We all have needs for our blooms and personal preferences of what we like. It's my hope that after knowing why certain things work well for us, you'll be able to narrow down your own grow list to what works really well for you. So if you're ready to get started, let's get right into it. In hindsight, one of the best things I did when it came to getting started growing flowers was I focused on growing annuals. Flowers that grow for just one season before needing to be replaced. Unlike perennial flowers, which can require long-term care and maintenance, think peonies that can take 3 years to establish, annual flowers are relatively low commitment. So if you decide you don't like a particular variety or you want to change up your garden design, you can easily replace annuals with minimal effort and expense. Starting with low commitment flower varieties, at least for me, was key, as it gave me the freedom and the flexibility to make changes to how I did things. You see, what I think a lot of us beginning flower farmers and gardeners don't realize is that the vision for how we think something will play out is often very different than the reality we experience. When I was just getting started, I originally thought I'd sell the majority of my flowers wholesale to local florists, and eventually work my way up to doing my own event and wedding design. I envisioned a cutting garden overflowing with blooms in soft, romantic hues. But through experience, I made discoveries that took me on a much different path. I realized that I loved being able to host U-picks and actually invite people into our cutting garden. And those sort of customers, well, they really enjoyed bright and bold pops of color, which was a big change from what I originally planned for. Learning what we want from a flower garden is a continually evolving practice. The more experience that you have, the more clarity you'll gain. But when you're starting with 0 to little experience, I think we often underestimate how important it is that we don't back ourselves into a corner. When you start with low commitment type flowers, sure, they may not be as flashy as a field of garden roses, or they may not continually produce year after year like a row of established peonies. But their advantage is that they allow us to test out the shape, color, and texture of flowers that we most need and or want in our gardens. If this is your first season growing cut flowers, give yourself some grace. And instead of hyper fixating on planting, the right flower varieties in the right quantities, so you can build the perfect sort of bouquet, focus less on the perceived success of the flowers, instead focus on the experience itself. Because good or bad, experience is what gives us that deeper understanding that we're all looking for. So next up on my list, I encourage you to seek out flower varieties that are easy to grow. I distinctly remember planning for my first flower garden and not wanting to be bothered by the more standard easy to grow varieties, things like zinnias, cosmos, and sunflowers. To me, those old garden favorites screamed boring. And so despite not being an experienced grower, I gravitated towards flower varieties that everyone tried warning me against. Things like fragrant stock, beautifully delicate poppies, and old-fashioned carnation varieties. Not surprisingly, a lot of time and effort went into producing pretty dismal results. Thank goodness I have a stubborn heart, because the amount of frustration that I felt in the first year of growing could have easily ended my flower journey before it truly ever began. I like to think of easy to grow annuals as the training wheels that help me to eventually find more advanced success. What I think is unique and quite frankly often overlooked with these flowers is that they offer more instant gratification. Seeing the seeds that you plant grow and transform into vibrant blooms over the course of a single season. Not only does that make your experience more enjoyable in the moment, encouraging you to continue making progress on your flower growing goals, but it more importantly builds your confidence that you feel ready to branch out to other flower types later on that may require more skill or more investment. The magic in all of this is that when you focus first on what's easy in general, your definition of easy, it expands to include more and more. As I've gained experience with growing over the years, I've expanded my own grow list to include flowers that more specifically are easy to grow in my given climate. If you caught it in last week's video, I actually talked about the importance of using your strengths to your advantage. You see, I'm not shy about admitting that I used to be very envious of the flower growers to the south of me. I saw their long frost-free growing season, and in comparison felt like my relatively short frost-free growing season was such a limitation. But when I leaned on growing flowers that did well in my cooler climate, like tulips, that's when it clicked that growing my flower farming business could be easier than I imagined. Growing the kind of flowers that flourish in your area with minimal intervention will save you so much time, effort, and heartache. And if you're growing for business, those savings are what often translate into a more cost-effective method of growing. Focusing on flowers that have lower associated costs with them is one way you can potentially maximize the profitability of your flowers. And in case you're like me and fear that focusing on easy-to-grow varieties will make your garden boring and bland, you can create plenty of visual interest with your flowers by focusing less on the specific flower and more on the colors which you grow. I mean, if you didn't know, there's a diverse range of colors available for most easy-to-grow annual flowers. Whether you like bright and bold or you prefer more subtle pastels, you can create dimension simply by varying the colors that you grow. If there's one more criteria that I could give you when selecting flower varieties, it's to simply grow what you love. It's an underestimated strategy, but when you're actually invested in what you're growing, you'll be more likely to follow through and actually do the work required of you. For a lot of gardeners, the anticipation of seeing your favorite blooms in full glory is the extra motivation needed to tend to your plants regularly. It's what motivates you to push through when challenges arise. You're more likely to find solutions to pest or disease problems when you care about your flowers reaching full maturity. So if you want to design a cottage garden bursting with old-fashioned charm that reminds you of your grandmother's garden, or if you prefer a more modern layout and want to fill your space with long rows of rare flowers that you discovered while traveling back in college, then by all means, you do you. Grow what inspires you and let it fuel your creativity. You never know where it may take you. Now that you understand my criteria for how I decide what to include in my garden, you may more clearly understand why I don't grow a long and complicated list of hard-to-grow flowers. For me, flower varieties that check all of these boxes that I just mentioned, these are flowers that stand the test of time and are truly flowers that I gravitate towards because I know they're going to perform well for me, season after season. If I still haven't convinced you on the fact that you don't need fancy flowers to create beautiful designs that your customers will love, let these bouquets that we created last season serve as proof. You can create stunning designs even with the simplest of flowers. Now in this video, we've talked a lot of strategy and I've thrown a lot of broad parameters your way. For some of us, having that sort of flexibility, it feels freeing. But if you're someone that thrives off a little bit more guidance, then your next step is to check out this video here, as well as this video where I more specifically name the flowers that have proven to work really well for us. And if you'd like even more help, don't forget about our quarter-acre garden plan, which I'll link for you in the description box below. Our quarter-acre cutting garden isn't just your shortcut to knowing exactly which flower varieties that we plant in our cutting garden. More specifically, it's the complete layout to our cutting garden, and it details everything from our seed sowing schedule to our succession plan, and so much more. If you want to copy and paste this cutting garden that you see here, if you want to recreate it for yourself, our garden plan is your roadmap to doing just that. Now that is all I have today. Before you go, let me know if you enjoyed the content in this video by giving it a thumbs up. Also, I'd love to know which flower varieties that you love to grow. Share your favorites in the comments below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.